Good.
And there we go.
Ooh, nice.
Have you done the tagging of monarchs?
I have in the past. I have not this year.
It's super fun, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. My name's Joe Valevsky. Welcome to Teach Outdoors Minnesota Workshops. It's good to see so many people here already. Oh my gosh, the Baptism River looks like a gravel road, so dry. And the fires up here. These are pictures of my place up here at Wolf Ridge on the North Shore. Just pictures of what has been happening the past couple of weeks with the different moths that are here and the lichens. Oh my gosh. So I had a lichen foray. I had a bunch of nerdy lichenologists up here. I hope nobody's joining who's a nerdy lichenologist, because actually I love them, but they might not appreciate being called that. But we were out looking at lichens for a while. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. But anyway, so we've got a bunch of people who are going to be joining us, and let's see if I can make sure that I get them all in, if I can admit them all.
I got it, Joe.
Fires that are going on up here. You've got it there for me, Pete? Excellent. Thank you. But these are pictures of just things going on right around here at Wolf Ridge. Some of the birds migrating through and some big flocks and a variety of things. Again, thanks for joining us. Our workshop today is going to be led by Pete Cleary and John Olson, and it's the new Minnesota science standards. And actually, Sue Moan and I have been talking about this probably since last January when we started all of these, and excited about this happening. And so it took us several months, but we finally got them hooked. And so they're going to be sharing with us, which is really great.
Yeah.
So what I ask is that while we're admitting a few more people here and just sort of looking at pictures, that maybe what you could do is you could put in the chat just a little bit about where you're coming from, maybe why you're interested in being here at this session. That might be helpful as we get together. And in a moment, what's going to happen is I'm going to stop showing pictures, and we're going to start. And I think Pete's going to actually start with a song and dance of sorts, I think. And then John's going to pick it up there with the tango.
And while I would like to do that, I think we'll have to wait till the end, see if there's time remaining for there to be any song and dance. But thanks, Joe.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Oh my gosh, look at all these faces here. This is great. Feel free to show yourself on the screen on the video if you want to. If not, that's fine too. But I know that as a presenter, it's nice to be able to see faces like Jerry Wenzel's happy face there. It's always great. Jackie, glad to see you here. Everybody, Kaylin, everybody who's here, thanks for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Pete. And so actually, I'll keep admitting people, Pete, but I'm going to also try to make sure that I spotlight you. Hey, you're right up front. It's all you.
Well, thanks, Joe. The one thing that I would say is that you don't have to say nerdy lichenologist. That's redundant. Welcome, everybody, to the Environmental Education and New Minnesota Science Standards seminar that we're running today. My interest in this is just creating high-quality environmental education, and I think being able to serve the people that we work with better, to create better educational opportunities is all of what this is about. And so I am here. I'm the Environmental Education Director at Dodge Nature Center in West St. Paul. And I've been in that role for the last 6 years. I can't remember the last 2 years. So, but then probably for the 16 or 17 years prior to that, I was a naturalist at Dodge. And so I remember outcome-based education, and then science standards, and now new science standards. And we're only discussing science today and not social studies or English, but I would encourage you to take a look at those as well for how they can fit in for what you're doing. And with me also is the guy that I learned most of this stuff from, John Olson, who has retired from the Department of Education. But I will get it over to him in a minute. We're going to work on today the things that went into creating the new science standards. We'll work on some ideas of instruction as it pertains to environmental education. We'll look at how everything is organized and then run through the timeline for implementation, though it has changed a bit. And then we'll give you some resources to go away with. At any time, if you've got questions, you can launch them into the chat and we'll see what we can cover at that time. And with that, I'll give it over to John.
All right, well, I'll share some slides that we prepared for organizing ourselves. Just as a little introduction, my career has been mostly classroom teaching, mostly St. Paul Public Schools, physical science and earth science. I did do a stint as a camp director up on Lake Superior and got involved with environmental education there. Also taught some environmental science classes in St. Paul. So last 12 years, I've been at the Minnesota Department of Education, leading ideas around science instruction and professional development. So, you know, one of the things I think that we talked a lot about with Pete and I is that helping people get on the same page with understanding the same kind of language about things that students are, that we're hoping to support students in their learning. You know, we've got some new ideas about pedagogy in terms of these new standards, and I think it fits in a lot with the kind of stuff that most of you have been doing in environmental education kind of settings. I think you may be tweaking the language or looking at a few of the points about the way that you frame things when you talk with students and work with your students. But I think, you know, you'll find that I think looking at this language and the way that we're focusing in the classroom will be helpful to you. So as Pete sort of went over sort of our agenda, we're going to try to, you know, provide some overview of the standards and the framework they put, and then we're looking forward to, in a couple of weeks, hearing some more direct examples of how this has been applied in some environmental education settings that you're all familiar with. So just a quick background on how this all came together. We have standards. Current standards are from 2009. Were built on the national research that had been done up until that point. But since then, a lot of other research has been going on about how people learn. And we're going to especially focus on things that have been put out by the National Research Council. All of this is free downloads that you may want to look at. In particular, I'm really kind of encouraging to look at this report on learning science in informal environments. That's really has a lot of thought about how environmental ed fits in with this. And I encourage you to look for that report, and we'll give you the link to the how to find those documents from the National Research Council. But the science community, in deciding to look at new standards, said, let's pull together all this research, and they wrote a document called A Framework for K-12 Science Education. And this has really been looking at, most of the ideas we'll talk about today came from this study that brought together both science educators, scientists, cognitive science people to pull it together, good ideas about learning goals. These were turned into a set of standards called the Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS. And you may hear that a lot. Minnesota was one of the states that helped in the development of these standards. So when it was time to look at that, we looked very carefully. This Next Generation Science Standards have been adopted directly by 20 states. And 24 states are influenced by it based on the framework. And Minnesota is one of those states that's based on the framework specifically. Although we did bring a lot of ideas from Next Generation Science Standards, but NGSS doesn't exactly fit the format that is expected of Minnesota standards. So our 2019 science standards reflect ideas from all of these areas that are put together. So we're going to focus the first part here on these ideas that come from the framework. And then later on in the presentation, we'll talk specifically about what that looks like in Minnesota standards. So these research reports, including informal science, or learning science in informal environments, have really focused on some key things. We know that students are born investigators. They like to tinker. They like to explain things. They like to use their things that they observe. And then we know that their learning should be both content, the concepts, but also, and more importantly, the skills and practices that we find that scientists use and that students should really learn how to do themselves. We need to connect to student interests. And so things that maybe don't interest students, maybe we skip that for now. The idea that understanding builds over time and that students don't learn or develop ideas with just one experience. They have to fit those together with their other experiences that they have at home, in the informal settings, and in the classroom. We want to reduce the amount of ideas, core ideas, or concepts that we expect of our students and focus on the most important ones, and then promote equity so that all students are learning. Science is not just for those that are gifted at it or have an aptitude for it. So we've put together kind of a vision for what science instruction should look like. And I want you to look at that and put into the chat ideas that you think are really transformative, things that are really going to change how people approach teaching and learning of science. So I'll pop up the chat for me to watch, figure where to do that, and put some ideas of things that you think from this list are informative, are transformative. Your investigations, journaling. Yep, that's fits came out.
Investigations from student questions is in there. I like that.
Yep.
Thanks for chiming in, Joe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. We learned to change our ideas is an important thing. Not necessarily whether they're correct or not, but whether we learn how to change them to more correct things.
Yep.
Yep. Devise the experiments. Great. So you can see that a lot of these ideas move towards ideas of the student involvement, more student-directed. You'll see a phrase that science teachers haven't used as much about phenomena. You probably have used that a lot, but phenomena is a big new thing about driving learning and driving investigations by students. And we're going to focus a little bit more as we go through this. So the framework asks for these kind of ideas that science learning should be figuring out, not just learn about. So, you might be tempted maybe in the past to say, oh, that bird sound, hear that bird sound? Well, let me tell you about that bird and why it's making that sound. Whereas instead, we're asking students to say, what are some possible causes? Does that bird sound like it's in distress? What gives you that hint about it? How can we figure out what's the meaning of that rather than me telling you as the expert? And I think that's a big shift in focus. That we need to pay attention to 3 dimensions for learning. The science and engineering practices. What are the things that skills our students need to be able to do to be investigators at their age and carry into the future. And we'll go through exactly what these mean, but cross-cutting concepts are ideas that go across areas such as patterns or cause and effect. And then the core ideas is the things that are in the discipline, things that we might have called concepts that students learn about physical science or science and life science. The other thing that's kind of unique is that each of these areas have a learning progression. There's a skill level that we want at early grades, and we want to progress students in those skills as they get higher. So we'll give you some examples of that. So there are 8 practices, science and engineering practices, that have been identified as things that we should focus on. So some of these were strong already in our Minnesota standards because we had some strong investigative skills. Asking questions and defining problems. These are in blue. Planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, and developing explanations are some of the key ones that we've been working on pretty well. Minnesota also has some literacy standards. They're in with the ELA standards. And so now we're picking up with these standards, engaging in argument from evidence. Pull together the evidence and provide an argument for your claims that you're making and communicating information. And then a couple of areas that are kind of new to us in Minnesota, developing and using models. And that's probably a whole nother area, maybe another session talking about models and what does that look like. We're talking about mental models, not just physical models, but what's the model that kids carry in their head about something. And then use mathematics and computational thinking, looking at how to make use of big data sets and looking at what's the mathematical thinking, what is really relevant to that. So Pete was going to talk a little bit about some ways that he's using these practices and things that he finds really important in the EE setting.
And I would say that, yeah, and like for all of these different things, when you're looking at your current programming and you can identify and look and say, yes, we're definitely asking questions and finding problems in the stuff that we do, or we're definitely planning and carrying out investigations or analyzing and interpreting data. The more that you can push that, and it has to be something that works well at whatever particular grade level, but know full well that you're not going to be doing all 8 of these things. You're not going to cover all 8 of this in a 1-hour program for kindergartners that are brand new to kindergarten this year. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is building those skills, working on cross-cutting concepts, and being able to get some concepts covered with them by experience. And so using mathematics and computational thinking, kids love to count stuff and they love to practice counting things. And so a lot of different ways to be able to do that. And you'll see a slide later on where we counted dead toads. And they were able to record a number, and this was young kids, preschool age, but being able to count things that are both alive or recently alive is something that they can do. Being able to count acorns, or being able to group acorns into 2s or sets of 3 or sets of 5 or sets of 10 is another way of doing some computational thinking outside. Or anytime, like monarch tagging is perfect computational activity for kids of all age levels outside. I mean, it's a thing where someone else might be carrying out the investigation, but you're gathering the data for it. And in doing that, you're helping to promote their computational thinking. But again, don't worry about all 8 in 1-hour time block. Worry about making sure that you're pushing kids along and developing their scientific thought throughout that hour.
I think as you design an experiment or experience, it's good to pick maybe 1 or 2 that you're really going to focus on. And that your goal is that at the end of this experience, the students are better at that skill than they were at the beginning. And if you can ask the students at the end, how has your skill at asking questions improved from this experience? Then you've got a good focus. And one of the things that's, I think, important is that each of these skills, each of these practices has a progression of learning. So for example, in the one about asking questions, in early grades, we're looking at based on the observation. At later grades, we're talking about what are the patterns and how can we ask questions that are based upon patterns and cause and effect. And maybe at middle grades, we're looking at what are some models that fit within this and overall explanations, and how does what we've seen explain with that, and how can these questions we're asking when we provide an answer, how can those answers predict other phenomena that we may experience later on. And then the next dimension is called cross-cutting concepts. So these are things that usually are part of actually your vocabulary in discussing with students about things that they've seen. What's the pattern that you see? What's the structure and function of those seeds, and how do they help be dispersed in the area, in the air? How does this part fit with the overall system? Subsystems, small ecosystems to bigger ecosystems. So, and Pete, did you have another comment on these?
Oh yeah, because and on this, the standards are really pushing it from this is this and that is that nature or environmental education to much more going from explanatory to more exploratory. And so when you're using all of these different cross-cutting concepts in, let's say, for instance, a program about birds, then you're looking at structure and function of beaks and feet and wings. You're looking for patterns that they might be able to find outside by observation. You can talk about matter and energy as far as what's the food for a bird, let's go find out. But rather than simply saying that's red-eyed vireo, oh, the song from that was this or that. And while that might, you're going to have more trouble with the teachers than you will with the kids on being able to do investigations, because there are some teachers that are really going to want to know, oh, really, what bird was that? Whereas the kids may or may not, they'll get the name and stop, and that'll be about it for them. So when you look at these cross-cutting concepts, a lot of what drives good programming is right in there.
Hey, Pete and John, I noticed that the cause and effect is very large, followed by patterns and so on. Was the color coding or the size mean anything that we should pay attention to?
Yeah, I think the person who put this together sort of said, cause and effect is really a big factor in what we're doing for science. We're trying to explain what causes the things that we're seeing. And so the color coding is partially some things that are somewhat related to each other. Doesn't necessarily mean differences of importance, but they kind of connect to each other.
I think if you asked a number of people, I think everybody in this particular seminar right now would probably put things in different colors with different sizes according to how they learn best. And that's fine. In fact, that would be a fun thing to do. We're not going to do it right now. But with all these important things, like at your site in any particular programming is actually going to be the thing that's the biggest, and what are going to be the ones that are most related is kind of an important question.
So the third dimension is called disciplinary core ideas, or we kind of shorten it up in Minnesota to call it just core ideas. So these are the concepts about the various science ideas. I highlighted a few that I think we oftentimes do in environmental ed, but there may be others that you look at as well. And perhaps you'd want to, if there are some other areas that you really focus on in your area, maybe you want to add some of those. Could you add some of those in the chat? Some other things that you focus on besides just these.
While I don't think a lot of people are going to throw heredity in there, I would love to hear if anybody's actually doing programming on heredity. But yeah, throw into the chat any of the other ones that aren't highlighted here. And I can see pretty quickly first place in the universe coming up with anybody who's got a Star Lab. And I'm looking at you, RELCs.
Yeah.
So.
The structures and processes, the LS1, Life Science 1, we do a lot of too, I think, in nature and EE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Molly, I would say yes. That would be exactly how that works.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of LS4s.
Doesn't Earth systems also cover weather?
Yes, in fact, that's the weather and climate kind of section in there.
So I think a lot of us do that. And so I was just like, wait, where are some of our programs? I bet you're doing a lot more of these than you think.
Mhm. So since the emphasis was on getting all the three dimensions together, they decided when they wrote the next generation science standards that they would not have separate strands for each of these things. So in our old Minnesota standards of 2009, we have a strand for nature of science and engineering, where the investigative stuff is. And then we have the other three strands of physical science, life science, and earth science. With NGSS, they just took the hint of the framework and say all three of these are together. So a standard in the NGSS combines these together. So this particular one is use argument based on empirical evidence and scientific reasoning to support an explanation for how characteristic animal behaviors and specialized plant structures affect the probability of successful reproduction of animals and plants. So the part that's the science and engineering practices is about using argumentation and reasoning. So that's in the blue part. The cross-cutting concept is for affecting probability, cause and effect. And the orange part is a disciplinary core idea about growth and development of organisms. So in the next generation science standards, they refer back to the framework document for the content about that and call that out. And so if you use the framework, you can follow what's the background information. You know, in old standard language, it says we take a bunch of stuff and we pack it together to form a standard. So now we're trying to show the unpacking, show the packing that was put together before we wrote that statement. So looking at that from the next generation science standards is a really helpful way to get more background of what the statement is looking for. So Pete, you're going to talk a little bit about this idea of phenomenon instruction.
Correct. And for that, we're rolling right into this phenomenon. If you're looking at this, this is post prairie burn at Dodge Nature Center. There's a group of preschoolers there, and all it is getting them onto the site to be able to explore and find out kind of what's gone on. And when you look at the phenomenon in question, the observable event was a fire that went through here. But then it's the questions that come from the kids, observations that they're making. Is the ground warm? Is the ground cold? And can be guided by you as you're going through there. Well, in finding the first dead toad, I'm like, well, we can explore and see if there are any more. But it was mostly led by them. And so getting them out there to be able to explore, to be able to look around and ask questions and then guide them through, gets you a little bit more closer to what's happening in the newer science standards. And so, yeah, and then to be able to count the number of dead toads that there were is just exactly what, oops.
You're still with us, Pete.
Oh, I'm having a little technical difficulty on my part.
Yep.
But yeah, gets you closer to really what's happening. And so, you know, getting them out there you could say, you know, we had a prairie burn and their questions that they come up with, is everything dead? Well, we'll have to kind of wait and see, but then being able to start an investigation based on their questions is something that, again, goes right after the new science standards. And so we're gonna jump into a Jamboard. John, will you put the link into the chat, where you guys, if you would, take phenomenon that you would observe at work with groups of students, and you can put it up in as a phenomenon. We have an example or two, or we have one example in there for you, an investigation that might rise from that, and then what concept, what core idea is that really coming from? If you want to throw in any cross-cutting ideas as well, that could be something that would be good as well.
So in case you're not familiar with the Jamboard, if you go on the left side, this little sticky note here, if you click on that, you get to write some idea that you have here. So and then you hit save. It'll pop up in a corner, and then you can click on it and drag it to where you want it.
Oh, we got to let people edit on that, John. Molly's in, but
Oops. Okay, everybody should be able to edit now, hopefully. If it's not working for you, refresh it.
And you may need to toggle back to the screen where we can click on the link to join that Jamboard.
Look in the
Oh,
chat.
wait, never mind, in the chat. Duh, sorry.
Click on the chat. Are you able to edit now?
Yes.
Okay. Good. There's one coming.
right. That's the mud.
So try to think of, from a phenomenon, think of an investigation that goes with it and a concept that you're aiming to learn. I'll slide this with you.
Like that.
Getting a lot of really good phenomena.
And investigations look like they're starting to.
Yeah. Mhm. Good. Great.
Well, Scats made its appearance.
Mhm.
That's for that. Nice form, not a link. Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm. Yep.
You guys-
Good.
Thanks.
Shows a real good understanding of the difference between these three kind of things. And I like that comparison, especially for the geese. The geese flying overhead is phenomenon. The concept that you're looking for is geese migrate south in the fall in chatty flocks. Great.
I'm liking the walnut one too. One teacher got very mad at me one time because the kids were all excited and they walked up with walnut in their hands and they're like, look what we found, look what we found. And I was like, oh, it's walnut. And they're like, now you just ruined the investigation. 'Cause then they had the name, but it wasn't the name that they were working on. It was like, what's happening with it? And yeah, I was like, oh, my bad.
Yeah.
We got a lot of stuff in there.
Good. It's good examples. Let's see.
There.
It's hard to maybe add all this, but I'm imagining how we could draw or model a lot of these things in our journal. I'm thinking of scads, of data we can collect, numbers, computational thinking, the ones that, are somewhat newer to many of us, easy to embed into these ideas I'm seeing on the Jamboard.
Often a sequence that you work with is, you start out with, what do you notice? What do you wonder about? And then from the things that you wonder about, you write questions. And if you want to go deeper in that, you can say, okay, of these questions, which are investigatable and which are researchable? Researchable looks like something we need to ask somebody about, or look on the internet, or find a book about it, or ask a grandpa. But investigatable things are things we can do ourselves. And then the teacher sort of has in mind the concept they're looking towards in there, and sort of helps to steer the students to, let's focus on a particular question of those that you mentioned. And in focusing on that question, students try to come up with some explanations, and they say, here's what I found out about that. And we ask them, what's the evidence that you've got, either from what you did in your investigation, the counting you did, or what you looked up. And so then the teacher tries to pull all that together. So it kind of a definition of phenomena. Phenomena are observable events that occur in the universe. They could be natural, it could be man-made. And we use our scientific knowledge to explain them or predict based on what we've seen. And the goal of building knowledge in science is to develop general ideas based on the evidence that can explain and predict phenomena. So we look at a phenomena, we try to explain it, and then we try to generalize it so they can use that knowledge to predict the explanations for other phenomena. Sometimes we call them analogous phenomena, things that are similar to that. If you want to look at some good examples of video clips that are phenomena, take a look at the site, The Wonder of Science. They have some really good video clips of that. But most important things that are most effective and are the things in their experience, local events, things that they encounter, especially at your site. So in phenomena-based instruction, we want to determine the learning goals in advance, then present a phenomenon that will help them get towards that learning goal. And we guide the students by using practices and cross-cutting concepts towards an explanation. We guide them by prompting them to ask questions, by prompting them to look for evidence, etc. And then the teacher helps to bring these ideas together to develop the explanation that's a broader idea. And then also think about what practices did we learn, and how do we use them, and what did you gain from doing that? What have you learned more about patterns that you did before, or causes and effect? And oftentimes then we sort of pick one phenomena, get an explanation, and then go to another phenomena that gets at the concept a little bit deeper. And after that, get even more. So we have a progression of working more towards them. And you probably don't have a lot of time for that in your one-time experiences that you have at your places. But if you've got a week to work with the students, thinking about a sequence of phenomena that can lead them towards a bigger explanations. So we've got a little song to help you remember this. You probably all know the Muppet song. Mana mana do 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 phenomena. Do, 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 do. I've tried to have everybody sing this in Zoom, but it just doesn't work. So I'll give it a shot. Phenomena are events in nature. Phenomena. Let's investigate phenomena. Are events in nature that scientists and students investigated, then tried to explain. So hopefully that's a little memory device for you, a little earworm that you can have tonight.
Pete, there is music. I thought you were joking.
Okay.
All right. So here's how this look in Minnesota standards. When you're communicating with schools, you're going to be needing to understand this kind of part. I should have had the titles up here, but here's a grade. Here's the strand. So we have strands that are pairs of practices. And in fact, when our committee tried to decide what should we focus on the most for our standards of the 3 dimensions, we said that the focus should be on the practices. So the practice that's involved in this particular one is arguing from evidence. And here's a statement of that practice that goes across K-12. This is a standard. Students will be able to engage in argument from evidence for explanations they construct, defend and revise their interpretations when presented with new evidence, critically evaluate the science arguments of others, and present counter arguments. So that's what we're aiming for over the K-12 experience. This particular benchmark, standards here, benchmarks are grade specific and what students should learn by the end of that grade. So this benchmark is related to life science about molecules and organisms. So we say support or refute an explanation by arguing from evidence. There's the practice, evidence of scientific reason. For all animal behavior and plant structures, that's our concept. Affect the core idea. Affect the probability, that's our cross-cutting concept about mathematical kind of relationship. Or probability is scale, I think, is the one on that, of successful reproduction. So here it has, I guess the cross-cutting concept was cause and effect. So here it has the code for which practice, which cross-cutting concept, and which core idea this is related to. And then we provide examples and emphasis statements that teachers could use in designing instruction, but that they don't have to get at that. Their main is to get at that particular benchmark as the grade-specific benchmark. So you'll probably want to take a look at that format and use that when you're communicating with teachers. Another emphasis thing in our Minnesota standards is cultural connections. And so we have a standard that deals with students will be able to gather information and communicate about methods that are used by various cultures, especially those of Minnesota American Indian tribes and communities, to develop explanations of phenomena. So this is a standard across K-12, and then this particular 4th grade benchmark deals with uses of Earth's resources. So oftentimes you have a unique opportunity to especially bring the ideas from the Native American community to help our students understand that people currently with different perspectives have a way to look at these ideas, the use of Earth's resources, and their culture and values may help shape the way that students make decisions about things. Just a little bit about the implementation. The new standards are to be implemented by schools by 2024-25. That was a delay of a year due to the COVID. And many schools are doing a phased in kind of sequence. The idea here is that in 24-25, the MCA exams, the Minnesota Comprehensive Exam, will be based on the new standards. So if they have, and the 5th grade exam covers 3 through 5. So if they have the sequence where they're starting with the new standards and 3rd, then the next year 4th, and then 5th, they will have a good relationship to the MCA exam. However, many schools think this is good learning and they're going to start earlier. So some schools are starting in 3rd grade this year, a school year, because they've got their teachers ready for that. But in any case, we're encouraging schools and teachers to start using phenomena-based instruction with practices and cross-cutting concepts, even with the concepts that they've been teaching under the old standards. So your use of those in your programming will really help support student learning as you're going through that. Pete, you want to have any other comments about implementation?
Yeah, and if you expect, well, as you can expect, the teachers that are now into new science standards, there are some that are early adopters and very comfortable and are great with phenomenon-based education and are thinking that this is awesome. And finally, and then there's going to be a larger group that are probably going, and coming off of COVID and everything in the last year and a half are probably going to need to be coaxed in and guided along. And that's where you can come in. If you can use the language of the standards with an understanding of what, making observations and asking questions, collecting data and looking for patterns, and being able to say to them, here's what we're doing out here. We'll guide you in with what you're, how can we fit this into your classroom? You start with your biggest partners, and then you kind of move down the way. If you can create a decent enough model for them to be able to see, then other people are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense for what we're doing in our classroom. I think that, yeah, there is going to be some guiding that needs to help happen, but being able to be able to speak to this, to remain relevant with the programs that you're doing for kids that are coming out from schools will be a great way to increase scientific learning.
And yes, Molly asked about what about the other grades, and essentially they're following the same sequence. So K is going to be the first year's, then 1, then 2, and same with 6, 7, 8. 6 in the first year, 7th grade in the second year, 8th grade in the third year, and then high school probably going to be a real mixture of things when they're going to do it. But most of them will aim to have biology change standards in the 24-25 when the MCA changes exam. So
in that, get the reality check from the teachers that you work with most commonly as to where they are in this implementation process, and if you're up to speed on the standards and have read through them a little bit, to know that things have changed and are changing and will change for how your programming affects what happens in the classroom and how the classroom affects what happens in your programming. But yeah, you can, I would start talking to teachers now just to see where they are in their process.
One thing I want to point out is that looking at the equivalent NGSS standard is often provides some real good support kind of materials for helping with that. But you should be aware that in Minnesota, we don't necessarily follow the grade that the NGSS is written in. Sometimes, we have in our previous standards taught something at a particular grade for many years, and then it didn't make sense to change to the grade that NGSS is if people have developed a lot of materials on it. So oftentimes the next generation science standards are off by a grade or two in some things. So you may want to look for that. And I do have available a correlation chart between Minnesota standards and NGSS. So if you ask me send me an email for that, I can send that to you. And maybe I can find a place for you have for Teach Outdoors Minnesota, put that can be put on there. So basically the other thing that we had in here are some resources and links. There, a couple of these I want to highlight. On the second one, the framework for K-12 science education, this site, www.nationalacademypress.edu, is where you can get all those reports for free. You can download the framework, you can download that informal education report that I referred to earlier on those. If you want a paper version, you have to pay for it. This is a site where the next generation science standards are. I mention that there are some good phenomena-based ideas at the at this, well, Bozeman Science or Wonder of Science on there. If you want to learn more about this science and engineering practices in action, we've put together some online modules that are designed for groups to work together on, but they have some really good examples of how to put these practices in action. STEM Teaching Tools has some 2-page kind of summaries, and it has several of them on teaching outdoors, teaching culturally appropriate, that sort of stuff. Then I found a couple of environmental ed reports that connect environmental literacy or environmental instruction to next generation science standards. So those might be kind of helpful to you. So Joe, I know we want to have a little time for a preview of the next time, but we can also take some questions for people too. So you monitor the amount of time that you want for each of those, Joe.
Absolutely. And so what I can tell everybody is that I've been recording this, and there have been some key things that I've been writing down as notes, but I'm going to play the video again and try to capture them. That this is a great opportunity to ask questions while we have them. So I'm going to actually start here real quick, which is Pete and John. Actually, Pete, I heard you say something like this, that the science standards are moving us from an explanatory sort of teaching to more of an exploratory. I may not have gotten your exact words, but I thought that was really cool and really easy. And I was wondering if there are other little phrases that we could use to help the teachers that we're working with to understand where we're headed, because that was really great. I love that. That might be it.
That might be it. I mean, that was good. I came up with that. That was as good as I can get. You have to wait till next quarter for me to come up with another good idea.
And so I want to open it up to other folks as well. Are there questions that anybody has? Feel free to ask. You can type it in the chat if you want. And I'm going to go look there now.
You can unmute yourself too. We like to hear from you.
Yeah. And actually, you guys, if you, John, if you could stop sharing right now, we'll have that. And that way we can see people's faces as they're asking questions as well.
Awesome.
Excellent. I'll see if I can do this. Remove spotlight. Check that out. All right.
So, and my last shameless plug is read through the new science standards. It'll help you to figure out and look in looking at them and go, we are already doing this. That's awesome. We will continue to do this. That is great. We kind of do that. We could probably improve that. And that grade level seems to be working out very well. And at other places, you're like, yeah, maybe we got to get rid of that thing. But you can look into the other parts of the standards and go, but this would be a great idea for a new thing. So it's going to be stuff, it'll be encouraging for you to say, yeah, you know what, we are already doing this. And then, oh, we could amp that up a little bit. And some other times where it's like, it's time for a new idea. So I've got my copy and it's paper because I'm old. And it has notes written all throughout it as to how does Dodge's environmental education curriculum actually match to what's the reality in classrooms right now. And so encouragement to do the same. You can pick out whatever form you like to do that in, but it was really nice to see, like, oh yeah, we are definitely moving that way. So.
Sweet. So Terry asked, when will the recording of this be posted? And I can tell you that so far in all of the seminars that we've done, is I've recorded it about 20 minutes later, I send it to Anna. And I think that then it depends on when Anna's available to be able to put it on, but I'll bet you she's faster than I am. So it happens really fast. And the comment was great information. I agree. Thank you. What other questions might there be right now, or comments?
And I would even plug, what are you still curious about? What do you want to know more? Because we're going to dive deeper next week. And I always like to hear, what do you want to dive deeper in? I have ideas, but tell me more.
Tricia has something that just got put there. We'll copy all of this to make sure that both Molly and Sue remember that. because 2 weeks from now, we're going to have another seminar linked to this one in particular. So next week, it's focused on being with teachers in the formal classroom. And then 2 weeks from now, it's the connection to this and putting some of this in action. And Sue and Molly are the ones who are likely going to be doing that. And I can also tell everybody that all of these links that are being put in the chat, we'll copy that and we'll make sure that that's available on the website as well, associated with this video. So don't worry about hurrying up and getting some of those things. They're all going to be collected together. In fact, if you have ideas that or resources that you think are valuable, go ahead and put those in there as well. And we'll put those for other people to access too.
Absolutely, because we are not the resident experts. We're just opening the discussion, and we want all of us to be using our experiences and such to make EE just better and more connected with our classroom teachers. I love it.
So there's a question here. Are the Minnesota standards and NGSS working with and or aligned with national standards? John, Pete?
I'm not sure which is referring to for national standards. The NGSS is, the tagline is by states for states. So states cooperated together to develop this. These are models for states to use as standards. There is not in any of the content areas, there's not a particular set of national standards that come from the federal government. Sometimes people refer to these as national standards, and that ends up with political kind of pushback because it's supposed to be states' rights. So states together have worked on these standards, and many of the states have adopted them, but some particular situations in states make that they can't adopt them directly.
Like Minnesota.
Excellent. And I love that Laura is shameless and go ahead and plugs the DNR stuff. Thank you for doing that.
Those are great. They have some really good, interesting approaches to how.
Oh,
I
we lost John.
I think he's
Maybe
okay.
he'll come
I think
back.
he just froze.
Boom. Poor guy. Frozen.
And
And I think the other piece, if you have different cultures in your community, reach out to them, ask them, things. So make those connections. Sometimes you'll be amazed at things you can learn in the way that they want to then partner with you.
Hey, I just wanted to say thanks to Monica, Valerie, and Adam as well for being here. It's nice to know that there's more than just one person per little handle here. That's amazing. So the number that I had was 37, but maybe it was 3 times as many. So that's awesome. Sweet. Well, Sue, Molly, did you want to put a tiny little plug in here at the last second about what might be happening 2 weeks from now?
Hey, Molly, do you want to say anything? Are you still here? Oh, there's Miss
I'm
Molly. I see her now.
here.
Hi, there you are.
There I
Yeah.
am. Hi, everybody. That's a great question. In 2 weeks, we'll be back on, and we are going to go with a phenomenon or a lesson and run it through the state standards. That's my understanding, and I hope Sue agrees.
Absolutely. And we're going to really try to sample a few different ones. We're going to play around with a couple different things just to help you get your creative juices flowing. Like, this is not new. And I honestly feel that the EE educators you're just positioned perfectly for this. You do inquiry all the time. You ask great questions. You know about the natural phenomena. Let's just, empower you. That's what we wanted to show.
Yeah.
I think we're in actually really good shape for these new standards because, if you're doing environmental education in nature, outdoors, probably already investigating and exploring and discovering, and maybe just have to adapt, make a few little tweaks or adaptations. So honestly, I think we're probably in pretty good shape.
That's awesome. And last January to June, and even a little bit over the summer, we had a lot of different presentations that we managed, and those are all on video, so folks can access those. And then I would also just say that next week on Wednesday, we're going to gather whoever joins with us and start to make a plan for what we're doing this fall and maybe beyond. So thank you to all of you for joining us. Thanks for the ideas. Thanks for the support. And Sue has one last thing to say.
And if you want to sit in on the classroom teacher webinars, please do. Because the other thing we want you to see is that there are a lot of teachers out there that you can connect with. And there might be something that you would love to present and share. And now you can share not just in your own community, but across the whole state of Minnesota and sometimes even beyond our borders. So please consider stopping in, checking us out. Maybe you'll want to present. We would love it.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I look forward to seeing you next week or the week after or both. Have a great day, everybody. And Pete and John,
Thanks for coming.
Thank
thank you very much.